for ubiquitous and others.
Good afternoon. I'm going to get us started. It's right at 4 o'clock. And on the way in, I heard two people, talking, saying the only thing between them and happy hour was Ken Randall and iLaw Ventures. So I'll try to talk quickly. What I thought might be helpful to do is, if just quickly we ask everyone to tell me your name and where you're from, and just give me a little bit of background. So if you want to start, sir.
Mike Vogt with Pepperdine Law School. University of Georgia.
Law Center, New York.
Jim Rand, Baylor.
Virginia University.
Good. Well, thank you. That's a great group of schools, great group of people, and probably we're working already with, I think, 6 or 7 of the folks represent schools here. And Megan Oblandi is iLaw's director of marketing, and helped me to put together this presentation. One of the things that when you come to Cali, I think is a little intimidating when you're on this side of the podium is, in the South we have this phrase that says it's like preaching to the choir. And what that means is, at some places you go where people on the different sides of the podium have different backgrounds or different interests in technology. But one of the things that you see at Cali is that people on both sides of the podium, or especially on your side, really do have a background in that, in technology. Typically, you really do believe in the use of technology to advance the legal profession, to advance legal education. So I think any one of you should be up here, and I should be on the other side. And therefore, what I'm going to do today is to go somewhat quickly through the slides, interrupt me at any point at all, and then we'll really want to have time for Q&A and dialogue, and, I want to learn things that you have in your mind or, different ideas. This is really about sharing viewpoints, and I'll tell you about some of my viewpoints and experiences in legal education with distance ed, but in no way do I want to describe it as an authoritative, unitary perspective, because what I love about this area is that when you come to conferences like this, you learn a lot from each other. I never leave one of these where I think don't learn more than I've transmitted to others. But with that caveat, we'll just get started. This is about distance education. And at one point, we'll really focus on what I would say are the realities versus the myths in legal education, distance ed. I'm sorry. So the first one is just who are we at iLaw Ventures. We had some great press. You think about marketing, what you do, and we had some great free press from Bloomberg News back in February. We really appreciate Brian Shepard, who wrote this article, but he was talking about the challenges that all of us have faced in legal education, at least over the last 5 and 6 years, with the diminution, almost the cut in half of people applying to law schools, and talked about the use of technology, and we could not have written the headline better if we wrote it ourselves. Can this ed tech company save legal education? And given the trends at work in the academy, iLaw might be arriving on the scene at just the right time. Just to give you some of my own background, I served as dean of a law school for 20 years. I'm originally a New Yorker. I didn't always sound like this. I moved to Alabama in 1985 thinking I would stay for a year or two as an assistant professor, and I've really spent all of my life there, and even after taking retirement from Alabama, we continue to have the headquarters of iLaw in Tuscaloosa. Megan and others at iLaw live in all around the country, work remotely, which for us works really well, but I remain in the South. What I really will tell you about, from my perspective, is that I feel like I was on the ground floor of distance education in legal ed. I chaired the first ABA committee that wrote Standard 306, the much maligned Standard 306, which has had some revision at least one time since we wrote it, and I guess that goes, about 10 or 15 years ago. But that was really at the ground floor, and when we did that, I think legal education really was behind where other disciplines were, a bit more conservative than some other disciplines in legal education. And then, as I'll talk just in a couple of minutes, I believe we were the first law school ever to put a master's program online. I guess we probably were pretty close with the law school in Chicago that has the great health law program for non-lawyers, Chicago Loyola. There may have been a couple that started close to that point, but I believe we were the first law school ever to put one of two or three of the programs online in the non-JD space. Also, you sometimes hear about something called the Harvard Working Group on Distance Education, and some of you are probably involved in it. But about 15 years ago, a group of people just interested in distance ed and legal ed met for the first time at Harvard. I don't think it really has met at Harvard since, but you've seen white papers and pieces come out from the Harvard Working Group on distance ed, and if anybody is interested in working with that group, we certainly can connect you with the group. As I said, my own moment of revelation, Jim and I were talking about our ages, and I'm probably the oldest person in the room, but my experience with distance ed is I was never a distance ed student. But when I became a dean, I looked over our programs. We obviously had a JD program. We had a tax LLM program, a residential program that was losing about $500,000 a year. In most parts of what you do, most enterprises, unless something was providing tremendous value in other ways, you would not keep a program that was losing $500,000 a year. It was a residential tax program that we showed in different parts of the state of Alabama. After attrition, because a lot of wear and tear on lawyers, going to a physical program, we would graduate about 15 students every 2 years. We would take people out of the JD classroom, so if you really were creating a true budget, you'd have to count their total compensation in your budget. And if you looked at it, it was really taking away about $500,000 a year. It was a bankrupt program. It was really in the red. And if you're only graduating 15 students every couple of years, you're not really providing a tremendous public service either. So we were about to close the program, and all of a sudden there was this thing called distance education. And distance ed back then looked very different than it looks now. For us, distance education meant that the University of Alabama system, which had 3 campuses, Huntsville, Tuscaloosa, and Birmingham, could show one distance ed course at a time. So you had to get in the queue, and it could show those courses one at a time to discrete locations in the state. I think we started with about 5 or 6. You're nodding your head, you remember those days. 5 or 6 locations. Lawyers could drive to the one closest to them. They'd come in the classroom. There would be 2 TV monitors, one that had the teacher on it and one that would go to one other location. Microphones would hang from the ceiling, and it was voice activated. So you would hear the professor speaking, and if the teacher wanted you to say something and you were the loud voice, one of the second camera would point to you, and then everybody would see the 2 of you. And today it sounds like, the dark ages. But what it did for us was, first, we went in the first year, from something like, the 15 students to like 65 in the first year, with almost no academic attrition, no attrition for people not being able to complete the program. And from a revenue standpoint, we flipped by $500,000. So we were $500,000 in the red, and then went $500,000 in the black in a single year. And I will talk about revenue. The program that we had was only better because we could access more teachers, so the quality was every bit as good. We didn't really lose anything. There was plenty of engagement, plenty of student-centeredness. But since it was a non-JD program, and the core was the JD program, we really should not be detracting from the money that the JD program had, and instead we had $500,000 that we could contribute back to the program. And then a couple of years later came the ability to stream the program through the internet. At its heyday, we had 250 students online, and to be very candid with you, Alabama only had 2 or 3 tax faculty, one of whom absolutely refused to teach in the program. We said, okay, we'll do it without you. But we had some reputation, at least in the Southeast, for tax. What we did do was we used faculty from other schools around the country, really took, in a sense, the best tax teacher model. So if we didn't have someone to cover estate and gift tax, and she was teaching here at Georgia State or at Emory or Mercer, we'd ask that person to get online. We would put that person on an independent contract. He or she would get the permission of the dean. Those were synchronous classes where you had a webcam and a microphone, and the teacher would get on at 5 or 6 o'clock on her time zone, and then the students all around the country would log in through our learning management system. Quality only improved. We had only more tax faculty, so that great tax teacher here was no longer limited to just the students in Atlanta or at this law school. All of a sudden, everybody around the country who was in the program had access to that person. From a revenue standpoint, we were then putting back into the JD program a couple of $1 million a year. So we kept money, we ran it like a business, we ran it entrepreneurially, but this was even before the downturn. So when Alabama moved about 70 spots in U.S. News in 20 years, took a while, but that 70 spots, we had money to do things. We had money for faculty hiring, raises, travel allowances, release time for faculty, student scholarships, the things that we wanted to do to devote to the JD program. We really had revenues, because anyone who's been in the dean's office knows there are very few sources of revenue for a law school. You have tuition, you can go fundraise, you can try to get grants, but the challenge with grants is that they're earmarked for specific purposes. So typically it's not really augmenting your budget, it's increasing programs and providing revenue for those programs, at least on a couple-year basis. But you have very few sources. So we started to act entrepreneurially, and what has happened, of course, during the downturn in applications is that that's what law schools today around the country are telling us that they're trying to do. They're diversifying revenue streams by having programs other than just the JD program. So that's really our pathway to iLaw. We've got a couple of people, Nicole and Maureen from Wolters Kluwer. Recently we announced that iLaw has signed a collaboration agreement with Wolters Kluwer, forming Aspen iLaw Distance Education. We feel honored to be working with Wolters Kluwer. For us, what it does is, I had a dean call me the other day and say, well, are you still going to be working with us? And what does this mean? And I said, let me just put it this way. It's kind of like iLaw on steroids, because Wolters Kluwer has a sales force that goes around the country to law schools. They have authors who can become online teachers, and really what we're doing is sharing the expertise that we both have in content with each other, and really hope to build a great enterprise in distance. Just to give you some background, although again I think here we're preaching to the choir, if you go back just a couple of years, you can see the growth of the perspective on distance education. One of the challenges you get when you are talking about distance ed and the law is that we don't have a lot of this kind of data just for legal education. But if you can look in the growth in online courses based on enrolled students, you can see the growth rate, 10-year growth rate of 375%, and then academic leaders, primarily meaning presidents, provosts, and deans, citing online learning as critical to their school's long-term strategy, 48%, just under half in 2002, and then by last year, 2015, saying 71% of academic leaders saying online education was critical to their strategic planning. So then the question of linking that is, how do we link that to legal education? What does that growth mean for legal education, which again I think has been slower in our profession than at others? What's the demand for online education at law schools? What barriers do we have? And then again, getting to this theme, what are the myths and realities of distance education, and where are we going? So when you talk about online education at law schools, the starting point for JD programs is Standard 306, which is still, I think, a fairly conservative standard, right? 306 says that a law student at an ABA-accredited law school cannot get academic credit for any online classes until she has at least 28 credits under her belt. So basically it means the first year is cut out for online classes. The exception for that would be if somebody gets a variance, and you have that at the William Mitchell Law School, where they have what they're calling a hybrid program. The students come to campus at the beginning for a week, and then they return at the week, and everything in between is online. Very experimental program. I've gone out there a couple times. I think they do terrific things. But if you don't have that variance, then a student cannot take online until after basically the first year. And then after the first year, a student can take up to 15 credits. So when we created that standard originally, a student was limited to 11 credits, and it's up to 15. And let's say the average of law schools for graduation is 88 or 90 credits. Basically, you can take a sixth of your education online. And then the other change is that in the first incarnation of Standard 306, a student could only take 4 online credits at a time. I don't know what happened when you got to 5, but it was limited to 4, and a student today can take 15 online credits all at one time, which, again, I'm sure I have some biases here, I think that's a great thing. I mean, it allows students, particularly say a student has challenges during a semester and wants to stay away, needs to stay away for an entire time, wants to take 2 or 3 classes during the summer, wants to combine, 6 credits with some clinical or experiential learning. It really allows a student to do that. I don't think anything bad happens just because you happen to take them at once. The other key thing about Standard 306 is that it does require that the online education have the same type of engagement and interactivity as you would have in a residential classroom. Now, that is an interesting part of the standard, because we know if you look at residential classes, they have different amounts of engagement and interaction, right? They're taught very differently, right? You talk about the Socratic method, you talk about Socratic light, you talk about pure lecturing, experiential learning, trial advocacy, clinical experiences, they really do differ in the types of experiences students have, different pedagogies, different subject matters. I've heard teachers say that by the time they get to the spring seniors, they're mostly lecturing because it's too hard to get them to give and take. But under some assumption that there's a benchmark that we all know what that means, the same level of interaction as you'd find in a residential classroom, that needs to be duplicated in the online setting. When we primarily were creating and delivering synchronous classes, we thought that was pretty easy to judge, right? The faculty member on his or her screen could see 6 students at a time, could call on students during that live class. We had polling functions. We thought that was the closest thing to replicating what you see. But what we've done, and almost everybody else has done, is move to the asynchronous classes where you really have to work on engagement and interaction in other ways, through message boards, discussion threads, problems, assignments that students turn in. So one of the things at iLaw that we really work hard on is how do you meet the standard of interactivity and engagement when you are in a setting where a student can watch modules on his or her pace. And what we do in the classes that we deliver is a student can access them when she wants during the day, if you want to do it 2 a.m. or 2 p.m., but you do have to keep up with a certain schedule of classes. In other words, by the end of the first week, you have to have gone through 4 modules. And that way you can link the problems and office hours and some synchronous components with what the students are doing. But that's basically standard 306. Any questions? And then it's really interesting, if you move to non-JD programs, all of that full battery of regulations that the ABA has, and I've done, you probably did about 25 ABA inspections, the ones that you apply to law school's JD programs, they go away when you get to standard 313 and non-JD programs. So sometimes we call non-JD programs LLM programs. We know that really it's not limited to LLMs. It includes MSLs and programs for non-lawyers and certificate programs. But standard 313 is the only one that really regulates anything that's not a JD program. And really the shorthand for it is a law school has to have ABA acquiescence. The ABA does not accredit or approve non-JD programs, and the LLM programs simply cannot detract from the JD program, right? They cannot get in the way or interfere with the ability of the law school to operate a JD program. When you are looking at online programs, it would be hard to find a way that an LLM program really would interfere with a JD program. Different platform, different class. What the ABA has been doing recently with residential LLMs, where the students are put into the JD classroom, the ABA recently has been limiting the number of LLM students in campus programs. So if you try to get acquiescence for a new residential LLM program, and you're simply going to put those students into a JD classroom, the ABA really is taking the number that you submit as your proposed budget. We're going to have 24 students, we're going to have 14. It may give you a few more, but it then will limit the enrollments because it does not want to negatively impact student-faculty ratio in the JD classroom. That's not the case with online programs. When iLaw devises classes and looks at interactivity, we do try to meet the same standards under 306 that we would have to if it was a JD program. But really, it's a very simple standard, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the ABA is not in the business of accrediting non-JD programs. So Megan, and I normally turn this over to Megan when we're out presenting, but what iLaw has done is we do a lot of market research on lawyer and law school demand for online courses, and this is just some of the basic data that we've come up with. And this is not about specific subject matter, but this would be about, these were surveys that we did, I think about a year ago, maybe last fall, to lawyers around the country. They were out 5 to 20 years, something kind of in that range. There were a diversity of lawyers, but one of the things that we were doing as we met with law schools was many of them already had residential LLM programs. the historical model was that a lawyer would have to be in a position to take a year out of law school and to come to a brick and mortar program. And you can look at this yourself. You can see that at the bottom in terms of are you interested or not interested in, when it comes to being in a full-time program where basically you give up your job, 70% say we're really not interested in that. And then as you move up and look at part-time programs, hybrid programs, online, and things that really make it easier for the student, you can see that this is what the demand is from students today. Now as academics, each of you, has to decide if you're putting a program online, is that pedagogy, is that format going to be successful qualitatively for the program? So this doesn't mean that just because students say, hey, I only want to be in class on Mondays from 12 to 2, you have to do that. Obviously, the quality of the program is critical, but in terms of what does the consumer want, what do the practicing lawyers want, if you're going to start or convert an LLM program, put it online, this data is pretty compelling. If you do it residentially, you're going to have X number of students. If you do it hybrid, you're going to have X plus number of students. And if you put it online and make it convenient for the students, you'll have the greatest number of students. This really goes and drills down a little bit into the different types of pedagogy. So particularly as we were moving primarily from synchronous to asynchronous. Yes, sir.
About what's best for the students at times that we're making them a little I don't know if you're going to get to this in say, the benefit of the online class, whatever, but then they're sitting in Starbucks, stealing free. Hard to say if they're getting the same level that they would, as you mentioned before, you used to have having to go to a set location and be with other people. Not do it in your pajamas made you focus a little bit more.
Yeah.
So there is the advantage of making them comfortable and making it accessible, but that's kind of weighed against,
Yeah. I think it's a great theme to think about. And I think it goes beyond the online versus non-online. I mean, I've had law schools today really are trying to recruit students, right? And when they're recruiting students, they're promising them a lot of things, offering them a lot of things, and then another school says, well, we'll do that plus this, and come to our law school. And when you talk to deans and faculties, what they think at times is happening and then is that is translating into the law school experience, right? That they have, quote, spoiled the students when they are recruiting them, and if you tell the student that, you really have to take this prerequisite, why do I have to take this prerequisite? So I think, first the concept of, recruiting students and making things convenient for them does have to be weighed against, the rigor and demands of the program. And I think it goes beyond the online. The challenge for us always is just to be sure that in whatever format we're presenting, whether it's, I think, the residential, hybrid, or online, that we are doing the things that makes them pay attention and be engaged. And I think, in a residential setting sometimes that sets up hurdles. I think in the online, there are times you have to really focus on that. When we were doing primarily synchronous, the hardest thing, the only time where we really had challenges, we didn't have technology challenges, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. The time where we would have it is that students would not be real careful about their internet connection, and or where they were taking the class. So we worked hard at that. We did orientations before to explain to the students what they needed for the internet capacity. What a lot of students and professors, at least in the synchronous side, did, or when students were calling on, is they did decide that they were going to divide the group by alphabet. A through F, you'll be called on Mondays and Wednesdays. G through K, we'll call on you Tuesdays and Thursdays. And especially on those days, you better be in a place where you can talk and be heard. Now I used to hear people in residential classes debate the same thing. Some teachers would do that, and they'd say, well, if you don't think you're going to be called on, you won't take it as seriously. So,
exactly.
And that was in the residential. So I think the point's well taken. I don't have the answers, but I think it's something really, to focus on. You want this to be good for the students and in some sense convenient for the students, and I think it leads to a more inclusive classroom, but you can take it to an extreme, and the quality of the education has to be critical. So this is just some more about what students are looking for, and again, as the academics, you have to decide how far you would go with this. Some of this always looked interesting to me. Students do seem interested in having assessments and getting feedback about how they're doing. Sometimes you would think maybe a student would not want assessments. That's the fourth item down. But 57% said that they really are interested in having assessments and knowing how they're doing. And we can share this with you if you'd like to see it. But just gives you some information. And a lot of the data that we've collected did make us have more comfort, at least with a certain number of credits for students, that they could be in the asynchronous setting. From there, we wanted to chat with you about what we would call 5 myths of distance education. And the goal here is really to have some dialogue about the realities and myths of distance ed. iLaw was started in 2012, and we've gone around the country talking about, I think, 90 law schools by now out of the 200 we've been on campus. And when we talk to faculties, we'll hear them say things about distance ed, and I think people have differences of opinion, but our goal here is just to sort out sort of the realities, the facts, from things that aren't facts. So the first myth that we have heard sometimes about is that you cannot create the classroom environment online, that it's simply going to be inferior teaching, that we all know what good teaching is. It occurs in a residential classroom. I know from having gone to lots of classes around the country, you see different levels of residential teaching. Some of it you would give an A to, some of it you would not give an A to. So sometimes I think when we compare online to the residential, we again have some presumption of the high quality of residential, and I think at a lot of law schools in most classes it is, but it's not necessarily the starting point for all discussions. So in our view, when we look at the teachers for JD and non-JD classes, we think that the number one factor is not online versus residential, but simply who is the teacher? And that mostly great teachers in a residential setting make great teachers online. We spend a lot of time on orientations and training for teachers. Teachers come at this with different backgrounds. We're working with Chris and Texas A&M on some online master's programs, and there, Texas A&M feels very strongly about the orientation and training that you give to faculty, that it's critical. But again, we think that the key to that online successful classroom has to do with the teacher and not just the setting. Course design is critical to it, and when you work with asynchronous classes, you have to have really crackerjack, terrific instructional designers that put it together. And then again, you can look at the some statistics, and by 2014, 2 years ago, nearly 3/4 of academic leaders would rate learning in online courses as at least at the same quality level as face-to-face courses. And on these, feel free to call me out on these and say, I think you're missing something or you're biased, but this is certainly happy to take any feedback on these. The second myth, and if you don't like this picture, it's Megan picked it. It says, myth number 2, distance learning is just another method to chip away at the need for tenured faculty. And I think when you do speak with faculty about online education, there are times where they feel threatened by the changes of online, and I think we need to take, the faculty concerns and faculty sensitivities, seriously. I got my first teaching job in the law schools in 1985, and if you really look at who's teaching, how we teach, the amount of non-tenured faculty, adjunct teachers, trial ad teachers, the legal education continues to evolve, and we view distance education really as just another point in the evolution of how we teach. The ABA does a lot to be sure that we protect faculty rights. They don't go away with online teaching. And the way we really view it is that if you have some terrific teachers or a terrific program, that the students are not limited by brick and mortar, by geography. So, I get in trouble when we talk about best teachers because everybody is a best teacher. But what our goal is to take, a class that someone may have that's really hard to cover in a particular place, say international antitrust, international criminal law, an advanced advocacy class that lots of schools can't offer or would only have small enrollments, and to make those classes available and those faculty available to students around the country, really just to break down the barriers and to make the classes more inclusive. In a minute, I'll show you that during the summer, iLaw delivers classes to about 25 different law schools at a time. We have classrooms that involve students from all around the country, schools that are highly ranked, schools that are not highly ranked, and we think, this creates some really great learning opportunities for faculty and students, and that's one of the things that we try to do through these classes. In January, Tom Metzloff, who's a great teacher, he's at Duke, clerked on the U.S. Supreme Court and has a great First Amendment class. We had a classroom that we opened up during intersession. We actually showed it during the AALS meeting in January, but we had students from around the country in Tom's class. So we view it as really a way to enhance the accessibility of these great faculty to students around the country. Myth number 3 is that online courses simply are easier, that it's sort of a course in a box, and it's like a correspondence class. You used to see back of matchbook covers if you want to take a class, send in this material and you do it, through mail. And again, the key to the rigor has to do with the faculty member, has to do with adhering to academic standards, quality matters, best practices and protocols. But the difficulty or ease of the class really has nothing to do with the platform. This past spring, we had a class in mergers and acquisitions. And we had students who, told us it was the most difficult class that they'd ever taken. It was a teacher from the University of Arizona. We've never agreed with the idea that somehow online education was a lesser version, quality-wise. One of the things that we've dealt with a lot and have right from the beginning had to do with security issues and whether cheating was easier with online education. I think there were some stories in the news about not knowing who was really taking the exams. And I'll tell you what we do, and some people frankly are a little bit creeped out by the kind of security that we do, but it's what law schools really wanted. When a student sits down to take an exam, and the student's known about it since the beginning of the semester, the student looks at the webcam and she holds up her license, and the webcam records her holding it up, and it says, "Hi, I'm Megan Oblondy, and here's my license." Then through the webcam, the student is taped, and the student also is watched by a human being. Now, to do that, we have to schedule exams. It can't be a totally floating exam where a student can take it any time, but the student has to request within about 3 hours of when they want to take the exam, and then we really have somebody watching through the webcam. You can take that webcam and you can do a 360 on it if you want the ability to look around the room. You can have them motion activated, where if a student moves too much, a light goes off for the person watching the exam, be sure they're paying attention and watching. To me it looks a little intrusive, but when I compare it to our law school experience, when students used to have like blue books back in the day, and they'd take their exam and their questions, and they'd run down the hall some way, and you wouldn't know where they were with those exams, and they'd come back 3 hours later. We think that the exam security in the online classes is at a minimum as good as it is in the residential setting. And then the final myth has to do with technical issues, and are technical issues a disruption for online classes. And the story I like to give in this situation is when I deaned at Alabama, there was a horrific tornado in the spring of 2011, caused awful destruction, death and destruction, and shut down the physical campus in Tuscaloosa for a month and a half. And all classes, I think it was like April 20th, and everything stopped residentially, right? They gave students who were passing Ps, they didn't do exams, they canceled graduation, and I will tell you that our 2 LLM programs that were online continued as if nothing happened. So With online education, there is no weather issue, and we certainly, where we were located, face things. Other parts of the country have, winter and tornado issues, hurricane issues. We never faced any of those. Our learning management system, our contract really gives us something like 99.999% uptime is guaranteed. I'll knock on wood, in the 15 years that we've been involved, we've never had the technology go down. We've had planned outputs where we've told students we're going to upgrade the system, so on Sunday night from midnight to 2 a.m. Central, the system's going to be down, but we've never had any kind of technical things. One time I had a question from school, what happens if the teacher gets sick in the middle of the semester? What are you going to do? And I would say, by analogy, what would you do if the teacher got sick in the middle of the semester in a residential setting? We've all faced those things where a person had a health issue, a tragedy, a family emergency, and you would treat the same thing online. But we've really never had technology challenges. Again, the only one that we have faced is where the students were lax with their internet connection, and that's bad enough, but when it's the day that they were being called on, it impacted the rest of the class. That's something that we worked on, but it was really on the internet on their side. When we've delivered classes internationally, the synchronous classes did sometimes raise, some technology issues because the technology obviously had to be reliable wherever we were sending it to. We had time zone issues, so we tended in international settings to do asynchronous more than synchronous, but it was really just a matter of the reliability of the internet connection. So I'll pause there before I give you the conclusion about some of the things that we've been working on with law schools. So iLaw really works with law schools in two different ways. The first is that we have been creating now for about 4 years online classes that we deliver to different law schools. I use the phrase deliver because iLaw does not have accreditation, and I don't want to get in trouble with the ABA. But under our model, the first time we did this was during the summer of, I think it was 2012 or 13. And we hired David Epstein, who's a great law professor currently teaching at the University of Richmond, a Barbary lecturer in the evenings during the summer. And we asked David to teach in online business organizations the first summer. It was taught synchronously. We had students from 4 law schools around the country. I think Trish White of Miami was the first school that hired us to do this. And we started to deliver classes to different law schools. And the way it would work is we'd put the teacher online. Every school would have its students log into the class through its website. So these were not, quote, iLaw classes. These were classes as if taught by David Epstein as a visiting faculty member at each of the law schools. The students would log in through their school, and David would teach the class online. And the first summer he had, I think, 60-something students from 4 different law schools. And we started doing it in the summer because one of the things that we saw was the summer school really changed during some of the economic changes in legal education. I think after the first year, students typically saw that first summer as in some ways a gimmick. They could do what they wanted with it. After the second year, they started to think about jobs, but the job market was so good that after the first year, they might do some, travel abroad, they might study abroad, they might work for a professor, and typically they take 1 or 2 summer classes and stick near campus, and they could lighten their fall load. They might have academic reasons to do that, family reasons, and then when the economic challenges started to hit students in the employment market, at least what we saw in our residential programs was that students stopped really coming to summer school, at least in the same way that they had, and that's if you have a semester program. Some schools have 3 or 4 semesters during the year. So we came up with this idea, how about doing online summer? Again, there was some great receptivity to it. If you put it in revenue terms, I know when I deaned, we used to be able to generate during the summer about $8 in revenue for every 1 instructional dollar. So it was also a good way to augment the fall, spring budgets. So we started with delivering classes to schools during the summer, and then we've continued that during the academic year. In the academic year, schools really see these online classes as a way to enhance their curriculum. So they have a faculty member who's, not available, and, she teaches products liability, and this is a way to be able to offer products liability in the absence of having a full-time faculty member. Or the school is located in a small city and the place, or small rural area, and the students really want international criminal law or international human rights, and you can't use an adjunct to teach international human rights. There's nobody nearby to do that, so you get, a professor from a place that has, and that's a way to enhance the curriculum. And then the second pathway that we work with is we work with law schools in putting online non-JD programs, that is to say LLM, JM, and other programs like the tax program that I started my career online with, and a partner with them. And by next year, we'll be working with schools on about 12 different LLM programs. Yep. Yeah.
I'm a class for credit down at Duke Law.
Yeah.
Whomever.
Yep.
How do you do registration?
I'll tell you the most typical model. So the most typical model is we hire David Epstein, and he works for iLaw under an independent contract with us. He's gotten his dean's permission to teach it, supplementally, just like if he taught a short course at GW. He's gotten his permission, of course, and then we go to law schools around the country and we say, we've got Epstein during the summer doing business organizations, and they sign a contract with us. They have no expenses out of pocket. We provide the learning management system, we provide the faculty member, we provide administrative support and oversight. And they're going to have their summer schedule, and let's say you have a couple of residential classes and they put on Epstein. So the students in each school register for that class through their school.
So it is listed in the course catalog. We'd have to get it into our ERP, and it would be law 242.summer16. Register for it, just like any other class.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So then, and then if, particularly for places where there's not a lot of online education, we actually will send somebody to the school if the students want to do a Q&A. So we've got this great guy, Aaron Mazumdar, who works with us, has worked with us for a long time. And Aaron will do a pizza lunch. He'll come to Richmond and say, for consumer information, if anybody wants to learn about how this works or wants demonstrations, he'll do that. Other schools will provide informational packets so that if they want to share it with the students. So then you as a student at Richmond sign up through Richmond, and then Richmond registrar gives to iLaw the student information so we can enter that student in our learning management system.
Is that a manual process, or do you guys have open APIs that you can transfer data?
We transfer data most of the time. And then what you'll be doing, and then we get in contact with the student, and we'll provide an orientation if they want and online. Or some of the teachers will do a meet and greet, at 5 o'clock on Friday and 2 o'clock on Sunday. I'm going to get online, and if you want to talk to me or meet me before, if you want to do that. And particularly for the synchronous classes, we did a lot of orientation for students. In other words, we do an hour session, so if a student wanted to get online with us, the first time he or she did it was not when the class started. And we did it the way that students like to learn. We would do it on Sunday nights till like 2 a.m. because we didn't want to do it on 9 to 5 on our basis. And then when the student goes to his or her laptop computer, log into the website of Richmond, which has a link to our learning management system, and they see David Epstein on the screen. And then David Epstein sees who has signed in for that day, can call on people. And then what we do in our shop is we monitor all the classes. On the synchronous ones at the beginning of the semester, we'd have 3 people available watching. And then if students had issues, we had a number they would call. And in some sense, we're all in the background. I mean, it'd be something like, some are online. And that's how it would work.
So the follow-up question, if you'll allow
Yeah.
me, is how then do you price credit hours when tuition at all these different schools paying for a credit hour based on your guys' cost model, not based on my home institution's model? Is that correct?
No, you pay tuition to your school. So the school sets tuition. So just like when Epstein teaches BizOrg at Richmond, Richmond sets the price. Then Epstein gets a visit at North Texas. He did a visit at North Texas 2 years ago. The students get Epstein and they're paying North Texas price. And he gets a visit at Harvard And the students pay Harvard prices, and that's how they do it. And then we work with the schools on what they pay us.
Situation.
Yeah. So the students are really paying for the credit. And that's why, for example, in the summer at most law schools, it really is a revenue generator. And the reason for that is about 80% of law schools have block tuition. So in the fall, the student pays, say, $14,000 for 12 to 17 credits. So if they take 3 in the summer, it's not diminishing what they're paying in the fall. They're just deciding, I want to get ahead. I want to take BizOrg in the summer. I'm scared of it. I don't want to have to take it during the year, or I love corporate work and I want to take it as early as possible and get prerequisites, or, I think the fall is going to be a heavy time for me. I want to get it under my belt. So I'll make the choice to pay during the summer. So for about 80% of the law schools, it really is a revenue generator in the summer. Just the way it always has been residentially. It's just that students don't want to come residentially as much anymore. And then during the academic year, there's really not a revenue piece involved for the school. In other words, I think you have to do the JD classes as a way for the school as instructional expense, right? So the school says, so-and-so retired, or this class would be neat, but I can't go out and hire somebody if I'm going to have 3 students in international antitrust law. So we'll create this economy of scale, and we'll end up with 18 students. And one thing I'll tell you is we watch student-faculty ratio really closely, but we've even had plenty of classes where, on an economic standpoint, we've lost money. I mean, we've had students, classes where we had 6 total students, and even though we had something in the contract, I think, that said we could cancel if we don't have 10, we've done it. We did a class this past spring where we only had students from Emory, and Emory has worked with us right from the beginning, and we did it anyway. And on a revenue, so we think being a good partner is being a good partner, whether we have big enrollments or small enrollments. So we've had some pretty small classes, single-digit classes that we still offer. We had Will's Trust this summer with a great teacher, Jerry Byer, and Jerry had 8 or 9 students total. But it's a means of then giving those classes to students. Yeah.
The library at where I work actually was a part of that.
Yes.
The email addresses students, and we would add them to the Twin site as guest users.
Right.
And we dealt with the Twin support for those students, which was a challenge sometimes internationally. Aaron's a good guy. He never gave me a pizza party, but
I'll tell me, Oji, you have one delivered on Monday.
that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's pretty
So
good.
the library played an active role in that.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the professor who runs it at our institution did a lot of it himself, but we were actively involved in that aspect of it.
Yeah.
The students from a support.
Well, we always want feedback. The schools do their own evaluations, and then we send out an administrative evaluation. And then we get all the teachers together at the end of the summer, and we do this big conference call where everybody calls in for 2 or 3 hours. And, our goal is to get better at it. So, I won't tell you there haven't been any, bumps along the way, because you are coordinating with, multiple law schools. The second summer we did it where we really had a lot of interest, and we had, I think, 7 or 8 classes. One of the things we had to work harder at was schools would pre-register students at different times, and we didn't always have real-time registration information. So we had 2 classes where we turned around and we said, this class is huge, we can't, it has too many students. And we had teachers who, we paid them, but they actually did 2 sections. We did it in business organizations and we did it in administrative law because they'd gotten too large. So then, the lesson we learned was the next summer we needed to know, if registration was this day, we really just had to coordinate them. And then we have had times where, based on our projections of how many students will come from a school, we'd have to close a class at a particular time, because we just said, if schools contact us and said, we want health compliance, but we knew we already had what we projected to be 50 students in health compliance, that's all we could handle for that semester.
So is it a number cap or a date cap? Each X number, or they reach, or
It's more of a numbers cap. And if we have a certain number of schools that say by March 1, say we want this course, and based on projections that we have, data-driven projections, that we'll have the maximum number of students from that number of schools. If a school comes back on April 1, we just have to, we can't do it. because that student faculty thing, we just get to really pay attention. But we had one, second summer we did it, we really had 2 classes that were going to be too big if we didn't create other sections. The teachers we've hired are terrific, and they really are creative, and they know that part of what they're doing with this is new, and they've been pretty flexible with us. So if there have been special needs, like in the Wills class, some schools have asked for state-specific training because Wills has enough state-specific nuanced stuff. So, we've worked through those issues. Let's see. Okay. And then I guess the third thing I'll tell you is some schools do want to hire the iLaw team more on a consulting basis, sometimes on strategic things, sometimes on marketing, reputational, and often we link that eventually to the online piece. But we have about 6 schools that want us to do something that has a loose connection to online, but it's more about institutional planning and budgeting. I love this map. This is what we're doing this summer. These are the people who are, the faculty who are with us this summer teaching either synchronously or asynchronously. They're terrific. I think the key to all of this is having great faculty. They're known in their fields. Most of them are really good top 25 schools or, top ranked programs. Our goal is to have a diverse faculty. I think in this group of faculty, they've won something like, 45 teaching awards on their campuses. They're the people who win the multiple awards, really devoted to their students. And they have to have some agility because, as you suggest, there are students from different schools and, there are things that they have to make work with different schedules, or some schools will have a different exam schedule. And one thing I will say is that the faculty grade the exams for each school, for its students under that school's curve. So it's anonymously graded, but let's say you have students from Illinois, you'd say to the professor, take these 7 anonymous numbers and grade them under this curve. That's how we handle the grading part of it. But that's been a fun program, and then again, we repeat this during the academic year. And then the other thing, as I said, that we do is we work with law schools on non-JD programs. We'll have a school that either has an idea for a program or has an existing program and they want to convert it to online. So they start with an idea, and then Megan's group comes in and does market research. At some point, we're supporting the school in accreditation and acquiescence. The school files the accreditation papers, but we support it. And sometimes because you think of the ABA only giving acquiescence, that's almost like a gimme. And it's not that hard to get ABA acquiescence. It's harder, though. Sometimes you'll need regional accreditation like SACS, or you may have a state organization. We've worked with master's programs where you've had 3 and 4 different groups. Again, then Megan's team takes the market research and turns that into a marketing strategy. And then the key part is building the classes, the instructional design, working with the faculty. And the typical way that it works is that the school provides the subject matter, faculty expertise, and then we provide the project management, the videography, and the instructional designers. And then we can provide our own LMS, and then we launch the program. With most schools, this gives you a kind of a breakdown in the LLM space, what the school does and what we do on our end. And the school has to make all academic decisions and provides the faculty expertise. And seeing our friend Chris from Texas A&M, he can say how accurate I am in describing it to you. All right, and that's it. Happy hour is only 5 minutes away, but we're happy to have Q&A, and I'll stick around after. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. What do you think about, since you wrote the standard 306,
Yeah.
program, they're trying to do a
Yeah.
hybrid, but they don't really have.
I got to be really careful here. So, William Mitchell has what they call a hybrid program. I think it's even more radical than that because it's, if you spend 12 weeks online and 2 on campus, calling it a blended 50-50 program. I think it's basically online. And I'm a fan of what they're doing. I think Simon is, I think he's done a great job with it. It's a great program. I think Syracuse got ahead of the game because they announced they were doing that. And you had to really read the small print to understand that they had not yet gotten approval. So I think they got ahead of it. but I think they've got a great dean, and, Craig Boise is coming in, a great president, and Ken Severus from Washington, so it'll be interesting. I think the question for the ABA is they'll get more and more of those applications, and, I don't know how the ABA will distinguish between those applications, right? It's going to be really interesting to see. And our prediction on the ABA standard, 306 is that you won't see any more piecemeal changes. You won't see it go like 15 credits to 18 to 20, that it's going to be 15, and then at some point it'll be open. And I think the speed with which that happens, and I'm not necessarily advocating for that here at all, but I think the question is going to be, when the students from, Mitchell Hamlin start taking the bar exam and looking for jobs and the success and evaluating what they're doing. I think the program in Minnesota is terrific. They're reaching some communities they would have trouble reaching otherwise. I think it's inclusive. I think the critical part of it is going to be, are the students on an output basis and assessment?
What you just saying, timeline, this is Texas A&M School of Law, a relatively new school. We engaged them since January, trying to put together an entirely online program in Wales and English. It was through accreditation. What I didn't thought about was we, and of course, a good up in the air. From them that very because they have been also very satisfied with them and just
We'll come back next year and we have to validate that, right? We appreciate that, Chris, and we enjoy working with you, and we and Burns in the program. And one of the great things about Texas A&M, they really set the standard high, and they want to push the envelope of online. So thank you for that. Some folks are starting, but yep.
Are you only doing summer offerings right now?
No, we do it throughout the academic year.
Okay.
Yeah, we do full spring.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be happy to follow up with you. Show you what we're.
Flyer downstairs on the table too that has all the courses for.
You gotta punch your thing. You got in that
I
lottery.
saved
if you
some
do
tab
that.
last year, so I'm not even entering.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna stick around, but thanks for coming today.
Hey, I'm the assistant dean for speaking with students.
See you again.
Nice to see you. This is, well, I am. So that was the time online education was really blowing up. And education got some lost. Thanks for jumping in on while I really appreciate
Change and all of that. I haven't downstairs. So I'll be here for the breakfast part when people write down, once they go to session.
Only that you be, only
Okay,
that you be.
okay. I'll shoot him an email tonight just to make sure that, either you remember to touch base with him or he remembers to touch base with me. Because every time he's up at the ADA association, so the two of you are conferenced out, I'm sure. So between the two of you, I'll make sure one of you remembers.
The reason we moved them is because.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, good. Oh, yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Because if you yourself of all people know this first. And again, I'm not in that. I'm being sanctioned. I don't know why they do this.
You're not gonna find it about, they took me out.
Could be, basically, you tell us.
But again, I only have some sway.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, great. Thanks. Sure, I don't have it with me, but I have it downstairs.
You just tell me what you know.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm
You just tell me.
Oh, he's a great guy, yeah. Now, are you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All right, good.
That's one thing I left out there is that, having hired you, came
Thanks for coming in.
private practice, he's not looking at things differently.
Yes, sir, thank you.
I think that after several other.
Megan,
Bye, really great meeting you. Thanks for coming in. Bye.
Martin Brinkley, you know, a lot of eyebrows were raised, well, we've been hiring this guy as a private practice attorney. How to run a law school. And he and I at our first meeting. I'm preaching to the choir.
Well, yeah, and you know, one of the things you've done for you is you have a good brand. That's what we can say, is, you know, if you don't, you know.
Hi, I'm Doug Evans from UNC.
Thanks for asking so many excellent
Sure.
questions.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, again, I really haven't gone to any of the vendor tables down there because I've been on so many sessions, but yeah, I'd like to engage with you guys a little bit.
Sounds good.
Cook up.
Yeah,
I love it.
absolutely.
And then I had a follow-up phone call with your